name is Ann Dolan, and for the last 26 years, my team of tutors, executive function coaches, and college coaches have been helping kids to do better in school and to improve their grades. Some of you might be here tonight because maybe some grades that you've seen in this report card are different than the others because your child has been a strong student. Others of you might be here today because you've been dealing with this for a long time, semester after semester of disappointing grades, and you're not sure what to do. And then others of you might be here because your child is kind of like consistently inconsistent. They're kind of up and down, and that too is confusing. But regardless of the reason, I want you to know I understand. And tonight we're going to talk about ways that you can help your kids at home. And also, I'm going to pull back the curtain a bit and share with you ways that we as professionals work with kids that are struggling with their grades as well. So here's the thing, when we think about poor grades, we think maybe kids just don't care. But the reality is that all kids want to do well in school. They want to please, they want to get good grades, and they want to do the right thing. The problem isn't actually their intention. That's all fine and good. The problem is their execution, their ability to get their work done, to turn in it on time, and to study effectively. So sometimes it looks like they don't care or they're unmotivated or, maybe they're lazy. But the reality of it is that it's a problem with execution. So what can happen is that kids get in this dangerous doom loop. They get a bad grade and then they hear criticism from others. This might be their parents, their teachers, perhaps their sports coach. But when kids get these bad grades, they really experience a lot of lowered confidence. And sometimes I think that term confidence is an overused word. Like we talk about it a lot, but it's so real. When you lack confidence in a certain subject, you just kind of feel awful about that subject and you kind of don't want to go to class and you kind of start getting this feeling about school that this doesn't feel great at all. So when kids have experienced with lower confidence in a particular class, we think that maybe they would try harder or do better, but actually the opposite happens. They put forth reduced effort. And when you're putting forth reduced effort, you get a bad grade and the cycle starts all over again. And I'm wondering, in your house, does this at all sound familiar? Has anybody experienced that? And if so, please put it in the chat of yes or no. I'm curious, have you experienced a bad grade, low confidence, and kind of the cycle going over and over again? You can put in the chat yes or no. Christy says yes. Thank you for that, Christy. I'm glad that you understand, but I'm going to help you with getting out of this doom loop for sure. All right, so what are the causes behind this in the first place? Why are kids struggling? There are a couple things that could be happening. Number one, they do not understand the content. Even if kids aren't getting grades, even if their report card doesn't have an A, B, or C, they still can have content gaps or skills gaps. Sometimes students just have weak executive function skills. That's their ability to be organized, to plan ahead, and to study effectively. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Or sometimes it's a combination of both. So as you think about your child, think, where does my child fall? What could be causing it? So let's talk a little bit about executive functions. I know many of you have really young kids in elementary school, but you might still, even though they're not really getting solid grades and they may not have homework or a lot of homework, you can still start to see these issues even in young kids. Okay, the first one is organization. That telltale sign is like, are they able to keep a pretty clean room? What is their backpack pretty organized? As kids get older, they have to know where all their papers are. Where do they put something? And then when they have more digital files, I have to know where they put all of those digital documents they need to house. Then they have to know how to plan and prioritize. They need to have a plan for doing their homework, and they have to be able to prioritize it. I'm going to do this first, second, or third. They need to be able to manage their time as the day goes on. They need to be able to start something, especially when it's hard. So maybe they have a homework assignment that they don't want to do. They still have to be able to start it. And then the last one is focus. So once they get started, are they able to sustain their focus even when there's lots of distractions? Now, as you can imagine, this is very developmental. We do not expect a first grader, a second grader, a third grader to be able to do all these things. But as kids get older, they get better at these things. The problem is that sometimes kids experience weakness in these areas all through their school experience. And so when that happens, because these things are like almost like gears in your head, and when one gets stuck, they all can get stuck. We want to help kids prop up their executive function skills when we see that this is a problem. So how do you know what's going on? Well, here's how you know. If it's a subject need, meaning it's specific to a subject, math, reading, science, social studies, Spanish, you'll see that their test grades are lower than everything else. So maybe they do fine on their homework, they do fine on take-home projects. The teacher says they participate, but they're not getting good test scores. That's telling parents and teachers that they do not understand the content well enough. On the other hand, if the student isn't completing their work in class, the teacher's saying all the time, like they're not using their time wisely, they're not completing everything and turning it in on time. If they have missing or late assignments across multiple subjects, that's a sign that it's an executive function weakness. And then, of course, as I mentioned, it could be a little bit of both. But even in young children, we see something happen that doesn't feel good as parents. We see that kids feel like they're in academic quicksand, meaning, can you imagine what it's like to be in quicksand? You just feel like you can't breathe, like you can't keep your head above water, above sand. You're like trying to claw your way out. And it is this negative compounding effect of falling behind, even at a young age, that really affects kids' self-esteem. And oftentimes they don't want to look different to their peers. They're embarrassed and they're afraid to ask for help. But I tell you, the sooner we can intervene as parents and educators, the less damage we see to kids' self-esteem. And so we want to extend that branch and pull kids out of the quicksand instead of letting them languish in it and crossing our fingers that, oh, maybe it will get better as time goes on. We want to intervene as when we see a problem. And it's kind of confusing sometimes because when we see our kids are struggling, we'll sometimes say, Susie, do you need help on this? And our kids just will usually say, no, I got it, Mom. Don't worry. I'm fine. It's okay. So their perception of things is that I can figure this out on my own. But often the reality is that that's not correct. They're having a hard time, or else they would. And so we need to help them. So let's talk a little bit about when it is a content issue, meaning that the student isn't understanding specific content. When that happens, we often see the Swiss cheese effect. And we all know what Swiss cheese looks like. It's like a piece of cheese with a bunch of holes in it, right? And sometimes I think students are kind of like Swiss cheese. They've got these holes in their learning. I know this to be true because years ago, I was a Swiss cheese kid. I can remember sitting in my 8th grade algebra class, looking up at the chalkboard and seeing my teacher, Mrs. Beaupre, droning on and on and on sharing with us how to solve these equations. And I was actually really motivated. I really, really wanted to learn this math. And I would look up at the board and say to myself, Anne, just pay attention long enough to understand it. You can do this. I'd kind of like talk myself into it. But within 5 minutes of not understanding and my neck aching and I had a tension headache, I realized I just wasn't going to get it. And my parents, they really tried to help me, but we would end up fighting until one day my mom got so tired of being disappointed by my grades and seeing how much I was having a hard time, and ultimately avoiding. She ended up getting me a tutor, and thank God she did, because that's when Mr. Rogo came into the picture and really helped me turn things around. Even though I said to my mother, "Ugh, I don't need a tutor, Mom. This is dumb. I can do this on my own." I'm glad she didn't listen to me. And I bring up Swiss cheese because when I would go to do my homework after class, I had these holes in my learning. And I knew some things, but I didn't know other things. And so I would slap down on my paper something that looked decent, even though I didn't know what I was doing, just so I would get credit for it, just so it looked like I tried. But I kept getting further and further behind. So the Swiss cheese effect is really common in cumulative subjects where one skill builds upon another, especially math when kids are young. As kids get older, it's usually like a math-based science like physics or chemistry or a foreign language like Spanish or French. But when kids have difficulty in math in the early grades, we need to intervene because if they have shaky skills here and they keep learning new material, they're going to have a real hard time with understanding the new material. So we see it in cumulative subjects, in non-preferred subjects. Maybe the student likes math and science, but they don't like writing. Um, you may see issues there. Or when they say things like, my teacher doesn't like me. I don't understand how my teacher is teaching this. If the student and the teacher don't really mesh, sometimes we see kids struggling in those classes too. So when we work with kids, and I would recommend this approach to anybody that works with your student, um, there's really 3 steps that we follow. The first is we need to pinpoint the holes, the gaps, and we'll go back and reteach. For example, in elementary school, everything kids learn is in the later grades, going into algebra, algebra 2, advanced math in middle and high school, relates to fractions, decimals, and percents. So if they do not have a solid foundation there, everything else is going to be really hard. So we'll pinpoint their gaps and we'll reteach the concepts. We provide active instruction because we know even though we're going to remediate and fill in gaps here, they're working here and they have to keep up with their class and do okay. And so we'll teach them, we'll work on the skills they're working in class, their homework, we'll help prepare them for a test. But then in the last couple minutes, we'll preview what's coming next. So we'll say, okay, Johnny, we went over these things. When you go to class tomorrow, you're going to be working on something new. Let me show you what you're going to see. And this is helpful because when kids go to school the next day and they understand what they're seeing, they're far more able to pay attention. So I like getting help in subjects for kids right away because it provides a quick win. Not only do kids understand the content and they can catch up, but they also feel a lot better about the class and about school in general. And it's something that can improve their grade. And if they don't get a grade, improve their understanding from the beginning with that quick win. All right, so those are subjects that we talked about. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about those executive functions I mentioned earlier. Sometimes it's a conundrum for parents because you have this perfectly smart kid who's super capable, and very verbal perhaps, but then you realize they're not keeping up because they're not turning their work in. They're not able to get things done on time. And it just is so confusing because it doesn't gel with their level of intelligence. And I'm wondering if this sounds familiar to you. So if this is your student, one of the things that's really, really helpful is to encourage them to have a system for knowing what they have due. Many schools rely on a learning management software, and depending on the school district, it could be Blackboard, Schoology, Canvas. There's lots of them out there, but it's basically the portal for the student to see where all their homework is. So when we work with kids on their executive function skills, we want them to have a plan for knowing what they have to do. And if they don't have a learning management system, they probably have an assignment notebook where they're writing their things down. And we'll go into their notebook or their learning management system. And by the way, we do all our work virtually, starting when kids are really young. Sometimes parents say, is that good virtually? And it's great virtually because we have this amazing software called Lesson Space. In fact, one of our tutors was saying to me, Anne, Lesson Space is like when Zoom and a smart board have a baby because it's so interactive and so engaging to kids that it just makes learning come alive. And so with it, not only can we annotate and share documents and write up on the documents together and all that, but we can see when the student isn't paying attention by the movement of their cursor. And that's super helpful too. But anyways, we want to have the student pull up their screen and we're going to look at their classes with them in their homework portal and see what they have due the next day and what they have due later on. And our goal is to help kids plan ahead by creating a prioritized list of what they need to get done for the next day and later on, and put that into their calendar. And probably more important, if they have like a book report due in 2 weeks, we help them break down the tasks so that they can get it done in an organized fashion and turn it in on time. We'll also help them complete assignments, especially their hard ones, so that they feel like they've gotten work done in the session. And it also allows us to teach study skills during the session with the student. And then lastly, we'll help kids anticipate obstacles. So for example, let's say a high school student has a lot of work to do and the student, has a plan for the week, has something big due on Friday, and they also know they can sometimes get tripped up. So we might say, hey, what could get in your way on Thursday of getting this done? Students say all kinds of things. They might say, oh, yeah, my favorite show just dropped on Netflix and I really want to watch it. I'm kind of worried that if I spend too much time watching it, I'm not going to be able to get done with this. And that's valid, and that happens. And so we'll talk with the student about strategies that they might use. Oh, what strategy might you use here? What about that timer strategy we use? Could that work? Oh yeah, I like that one. Yeah, let me try that if I feel like I'm procrastinating. And so by anticipating obstacles, when you get to that situation, which kids usually do, they have a way to combat it. All right, so that is executive function. Let's talk a little bit now about ways kids can retain information and study to help improve their grades. And by the way, I have a lot of the information we're going to talk about now in an ebook that I created called 12 Habits of Successful Students. And you can download it at ectutoring.com/grades-webinar. I think this ebook is so helpful for kids of all grade levels, whether you're in first grade or 12th grade, there's something for everyone. So again, that's ectutoring.com/grades-webinar. All right, so let's start out with one of the most important study habits kids can learn, and it's something called distributed practice. Distributed practice is the opposite of cramming. Most kids, if they have a test on Friday, they will study on Thursday night, if they even study at all. And so we want to help them take that time they would have spent on Thursday night and distribute it over a few days. So for example, maybe you would have studied an hour on Thursday night for a big test. Instead of an hour, what if you did it 20 minutes Tuesday, 20 minutes Wednesday, and 20 minutes Thursday? Why is that helpful? A couple reasons. Number one, it's in short bursts. And for kids that feel overwhelmed or they don't want to do something, 20 minutes isn't that bad. It feels a lot more doable than an hour, and kids are willing to do it. Secondly, it helps get information from short term, which is where it goes when you cram, not helpful for trying to remember something later on. And it helps you take it from short term to long term. And here's why. You learn it, you sleep on it. You learn it, you sleep on it. You learn it, you sleep on it. And it is this process of sleep that consolidates information into long-term memory. And there's tons of research on distributed practice. So it's something that when we're building out the student schedule and a learning plan for them, we'll make sure that they're breaking up their assignments. Next is called self-testing. 83% of kids report that they study by taking their notes and rereading them. So they'll take their study guide, their notes, whatever study tool they have, might look something like this, and they read it some more, and they read it again, and they announce, I've studied. But reading something over and over creates an illusion of knowing, an illusion of knowing. You think you know it, but do you really? Often you don't. And when this happens, kids think, I can't tell you over the years how many kids have said to me, I don't understand. I studied really hard for that test. I don't understand why I got a bad grade. Sometimes this is one of the reasons. So we want to help kids take the opposite approach. Instead of passive learning, active learning. So here's what you do. You take your study guide or your notes and you cover up the answer. Here's an example. You cover up the answer and you say to yourself, what is osmosis? Osmosis. What is it? What is it? You rack your brain and you try to remember. If you remember, you uncover it and look at the answer and see if you're right. If you don't know, uncover the answer and note to yourself that you don't know that one. And so now you've taken something from passive to active just by covering the answers. Sometimes kids don't have a study guide. We'll help them to create one. But the idea is it needs to be an active tool. And you can do this with your kids too. If you want to help your kids study, don't just, if they say I studied and you realize they've read it, ask them the questions instead, or teach them to cover it up and quiz themselves. Another tool we use is a stoplight study guide. Just like a stoplight, we teach kids that you need 3 highlighters to do this. And they need to be green, yellow, and red, or because there's not really red, hot pink. And we'll say to them, all right, I want you to go through your study guide or your notes or your unit test or whatever you're using. And I want you to highlight the stuff you already know as green. The stuff that you're like, I don't know. I don't really know this. I guess it's okay. That's yellow. And the stuff that you're like, I do not know this, it's red. And so what you're going to have eventually is your study guide that looks like this. It can be spelling words for a young child. It can be really anything. It can be a packet the teacher sends home for a big test. But the value of this, first of all, it's going from active to passive, but also kids see, oh my gosh, look at all the green. Amazing. I don't have to study the green stuff. I only have to study the red stuff and the yellow stuff. And that is the stoplight study guide. So sometimes kids will report they're not getting great grades because they're nervous and they go to the test and they don't perform as well as they thought they would because they're feeling anxious. How do you ease those nerves? Number one, kids need to study in the format of the test. If the test is short answer or essay, they should not be practicing with flashcards. Those are two different things. They need to be studying by answering going through and doing short answer questions. If it's an essay, we'll practice by giving the kids practice essay questions. If the student is young and they have a spelling test, don't have them rewrite the words 3 times. That's not what the spelling test entails. It's entailed the teacher is reading the words and the student's writing them down. So you need to practice in the same way. That helps kids go to the test and feel like, oh, this is old hat. I've seen this before. Okay, this feels okay. And you're just naturally less anxious. Another strategy that's been proven to work for anxious kids is, the day before the test, we'll say to them, if we're working with them, tell me all the things you're worried about. Let's get that out of your frontal lobe of your brain. So you could have that discussion with your kids, or you could say, write down all your worries. And then on test day, we really encourage kids to do a brain dump. This is really for older kids. Let's say they have a history test. They have a lot swirling in their brain. They got to know people. They have to know events. They have to know dates. They have to know timelines. Before they start, get a blank piece of paper or on the back side of the test, just jot down everything you're trying to remember and get it all out. So those are ways to ease nerves. You might be thinking, great, this sounds wonderful. I like these ideas, but you don't know my kid. My kid is really resistant. She won't listen to me. She doesn't take any suggestions. And it's actually very, very normal. There's something called the stages of change based on the trans-theoretical model. We also call it the continuum of progress. So in my practice, we have executive function coaches, we have subject tutors, and some people do both. And so when we get a student, our goal is to figure out where they are on this continuum of progress. Some kids come to us and they're very resistant. They'll say, this is dumb. I don't want to do this. My mom said I have to. I don't have an issue. And then sometimes kids come to us and say, yeah, I see the problem. I really do want help for this. So on the left of this continuum, you can see there's a pre-contemplation stage where the student is like, I don't know, I don't have a problem. I have no interest in changing. Sometimes we see that when we work with kids on executive function. And that's why we have this soft assessment. And it actually has all of the executive function skills listed out that we work on. For example, one of them is I have a way of recording my assignments and knowing when everything is due. So it's multiple choice. The first one is, I don't have a problem at all with this. I refuse to work on this at all. 2, yeah, this is a problem for me. I've been trying different methods, but I'm still struggling a bit. So it tells us for one student, like, they're really resistant, but the other student is willing. And so with all the executive function skills, we will find some skills that the student doesn't want to change, and then other skills that they're willing to change. And it's usually studying because they want to get better grades. And so we start with where they are. And if they're willing to open the door and allow us to help on the studying, that's where we start. We don't start on the thing that they don't want to budge on. And I would encourage you that with you as parents too. You're going to get much farther and earn trust by helping students on the skills they want to work on. And so that's where we see our best work is figuring this out with kids and starting there. In subjects, we see the same thing. Sometimes kids are on the pre-contemplation stage, sometimes they're further along. But our goal is to help them move from pre-contemplation to contemplation, to preparation, to action, to maintenance. And they do. They move along on this continuum, and that is when you see real progress. So a lot of executive function skills, like the stages of change and many, many more are in this ebook. It's a different one, but you can go to the same place and download both. It's also at ectutoring.com/grades-webinar. So how do you talk to your kids about grades? I'd love to finish up here. We're going to talk a little bit about talking with your students. And if you have a question, this would be a good time to put it in the chat. So how do you talk to your kids? How do you bring this up when they're not doing well? What should you say? Should you reward for a good grade? Should you punish for a bad grade? Like, what is a parent to do? So, sometimes our natural reaction as parents is when we see a bad grade, or see, that the student didn't turn in something, we get upset and we say, I cannot believe you didn't turn in this project. You had a month to do it. I reminded you 5 times. How many times do you have to be told? And still, after all this time, you didn't turn it in. That is just so disappointing. That's it. I'm taking away your phone for a month. It's where our brains go to because we're upset as parents. And so that's called a loss of privilege. And it is a consequence, but it's a consequence that doesn't typically work because we haven't figured out what's causing that. Like, why is the student procrastinating so much that they're not able to get a project done? We need to figure this out. So that consequence doesn't always work because we don't know the reason, and it can create a lot of resentment. There's also natural consequences, which are fine. The student forgot their homework again. You brought it to them last week and you say, I'm sorry, I brought it to you once. It's your job to get ready the night before. I'm not going to bring it to school. That's perfectly fine and good. And then when it comes to rewards, we often try to reward our kids for things that maybe aren't necessary, like I'll pay you $20 for every A you get. But that, as you can imagine, doesn't turn out to be good because then kids expect something. And also a report card grade is like 9 weeks out. That's far too long. Instead, what we do know is that although rewarding for material things doesn't work, praise is another kind of reward that does work if we're noticing behavior. Like, I really noticed the way you came home and you started on your homework right away. I love the way you put your phone on airplane mode. What a great idea to hang your backpack up on the hook instead of putting it on the floor. By noticing good things, kids are more likely to do them. But when you want to talk to your child about their grade, we don't want to, as parents, do this when we're upset. We want to wait till we're calm. We want to take a deep breath and perhaps start with the words, I've noticed. I've noticed math is hard for you. I saw the grade. I noticed that science is causing difficulty. Tell me about it. Because really, our first step in talking to kids about grades isn't to get upset or to pass judgment. It's really to get our kids talking. And we can do that by using the words, I've noticed. You're just observing something. I had a student earlier this year, a 3rd grader, and he's a tough kid. I won't lie. He's very emotional, and sometimes he would get really upset when things didn't go his way and shut down. So this one particular day, we're working together, and I said, "Oh, tell me how math is going." And he's like, "I'm not talking about it." He just wouldn't open up at all. And so I said, well, on a scale of 1 to 5, like 5 being great and 1 being awful, how would you rate math? He goes, oh, it's a 2. I'm like, oh, a 2? Interesting. I thought you were going to say a 1. He's like, well, it's a 2 because sometimes kids have a hard time talking to you about feelings and how they're doing, but they may put a number to something. And that's another way you can get them talking. But ultimately, when you're discussing grades with kids, you can't always control the outcome, but you can control your approach to start with when you're calm, to have a neutral role, and to start with the words "I've noticed." When we work with kids, our goal in our sessions, whether it's executive function, whether it's tutoring, whether it's a combination, is to help develop self-awareness. So self-awareness is when kids can reflect on what they're doing well with and what's not going so well and how they can self-correct. And so we'll ask them powerful questions. So instead of saying, I can't believe you got a C on your math test. I told you to study and you didn't. Obviously, that would not go over well. But instead, we might say, oh, tell me what got in your way of studying for that math test. And then the student has to think about, okay, what went off track when I was studying? And they're able to answer and talk about it. Also, they don't see us as mom or dad. We don't have an emotional history with the student. So we can get kids to do far more things with us than a parent can do. I experienced myself this same phenomenon as a parent. I remember my older son, who's now 26, when he was in 5th grade, I was trying to help him keep track of his assignments using this calendar we had on the refrigerator. And he's like, Mom, I don't need to do this. I can remember everything in my head. I'm fine. And which she couldn't. And so one of my tutors came over, Gail, and started working with him. And at the end of the session, the first session, I said, oh, how did it go? He's like, oh, it was great. So what we did is we got this calendar, and then I wrote my stuff that was due on it, and we mapped it all. We like planned it all out. Like, wouldn't you know, it was the exact same thing I tried to get him to do, but because it was Gail, he was willing to do it. So sometimes that happens with kids. We also might ask, what's the one thing, not all the things, but what's a one thing? One thing questions, by the way, work good with kids. You might do differently next time. Or, hey, let's have a conversation about this. I'm going to set a timer just for 3 minutes. And often kids will talk for 3 minutes, but they don't want to have a big drawn out conversation about grades. At the end of the day, grades don't define kids at all. They are an indicator of how the student is learning at one point in time. It's just one indicator. It's not an indicator of how smart or how capable the student is, not at all. But sometimes when school is a struggle for kids, we really want to try hard to nurture their other interests. Maybe the student loves animals. They're a really talented soccer player, or they love art. You might be thinking, that would be great, but my kid just loves to play video games. That's okay too. Maybe sit in with them one day and ask, show me that video game. I want to learn more. What is it that you like about the video game? Maybe it's the strategy. Perhaps play checkers with them, or maybe it's graphic design, or it's video game design, and they can take a class. There's lots of things that kids can do outside of school to feel good about themselves. It doesn't mean, however, that let's just do fun things with our kids and not worry about grades. Grades really matter. They matter because it gives kids opportunities later in life. To go to college, maybe major in the thing that they're naturally good at or they like, or go to a trade school or certificate program. But grades are important because they give kids opportunities later in life. So if something I shared with you tonight resonated with you, and you would like help for your child, I invite you to schedule a call with us. I work with 3 amazing women, Kathy, Jennifer, and Ann Stewart, and they're all really experienced with families, with kids that are having a hard time in school, especially when it comes to grades. And we're happy to talk to you, talk specifically about your child, get your questions answered, share a bit about our program, and see if it's a match for what you're looking for. So you can scan this QR code. It will take you directly to the calendar. You can also go to ectutoring.com/get-started. But at the end of the day, we're here for you if you need help, and you can find lots of resources on our website as well, which is ectutoring.com.